Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 2nd of November, comes to you from London. And we're just seeing energy prices, a whole sea of red there as crude makes new lows. And we said crude would fall heavily last week, and that's what it's done. So it will be interesting to look at what is going to happen this week. We'll start by looking at markets first. We have got quite a bit of green on the screen showing some recovery after big falls last week. If we look at the dollar first of all, the dollar's rise continuing. So that is also having an effect on commodity prices as well. Looking as though the dollar did find a bottom there back in September. Remembering this is my weekly, my daily, and my 60-minute chart. Here I'm running on Thomson Reuters or Refinitiv Icon, but you can run on lots of different data sources and Updata, of course, including Bloomberg, Trayport, etc. So here we see the dollar rising. We've still got downside targets hanging over us, but interestingly, we are finding support trends here. So dollar looking set for a continuing better week. That means the euro looks weaker. We're sitting at 116 at the moment. We're bearish below the cloud on the short-term chart and starting to break below that September low, which of course is bad news. New lows are bad. If we look at Japan, the yen we see against the dollar, we're sitting around that 105 level. We've really been relatively flat against the yen, just sinking a little bit lower. Yen tends to be stronger in times of uncertainty, and of course we've got a lot of that at the moment. Sterling pushing lower, the lockdown in the UK not helping. And we are sitting at 128.80 against the US dollar. We're in short-term bearish territory there. And against the euro, we're holding the 110 level. With the European lockdowns also occurring, it means that sterling is relatively flat there. Bitcoin sitting at $13,500, so it's holding last week's highs, and we're seeing multi-year highs here, so that's really strong for Bitcoin followers. We saw the S&P 500 index was down 1.2% on Friday. A dreadful week last week. We see here the candle on the weekly chart. A really bad week for US markets. And of course, we're heading into the US election this week, so that will create some degree of uncertainty as well. And we see the Nasdaq pointing lower there too, and the Dow was also down on Friday. We are seeing a little bit of a relief rally potential this morning. We're up 0.75% on the S&P future, and much the same on the Nasdaq future. So we did see again those big candles last week, even in the futures markets this morning's beginning of the week here. But we are just sinking lower there, and we are bearish below the clouds. So for the moment, the big thing is we are playing for these downside targets. So on the Nasdaq, we've got this target that has been in train there for some time. We've got a new downside target coming in last week for 13% lower, 19% lower. So don't be surprised to see the Nasdaq pushing lower. And what we do notice with these futures is that the price of the future, as we get closer to the open, will either increase or decrease, of course. But we're seeing initial strength quite often failing to hold, so it'll be interesting to see where we are at the opening. But for now, it does suggest the market will open a little bit higher today. The VIX volatility sitting in the high 30s again, so we are still in that bullish zone for the fear index, which is of course bearish for the markets. So that's one thing we do keep an eye on. No new upside targets on the longer term charts, but for the moment, VIX is making 4 or 5 month highs, and so that's something that whilst we're in that zone, we are just fearful for the market. The FTSE future up 0.2% this morning. The DAX is up 0.3%, and the CAC Quarante is also up 0.2%. So we're seeing European markets anticipating an opening to a better opening in the US. Japan was up quite strongly, up nearly 2%, and Hang Seng was also up 1.5%. So we saw Asian stocks recovering some poise after a pretty bad week, but these trends are still a little bit worrying. The Chinese market was flat, and so the big thing here in the Shanghai Composite is just watching whether we break lower. And the Sensex in India was up to 0.75%, so that's looking a bit higher. And the Aussie market up 0.4%. Taking a look at gold, we see here we're up 10 dollars at the moment, so we're just coming back into short-term bullish territory. Of course, gold tends to be a beneficiary of uncertainty that we're seeing, but of course the US dollar is also weighing a little bit there. Stronger dollar normally has a negative impact on commodities, and we're seeing silver also just back into short-term bullish territory. US 10-year yields sitting higher again. They've come back up quite sharply in the last few days, so the market's starting to price in higher interest rates. So it's interesting that we're seeing that, and that yield is creating some concerns about inflation, of course. Looking at the energy mix now, we see crude oil had a terrible week last week. The failure to make that new high was really starting to hang over us. We were bearish to clients last week. We've broken to new lows. That means we're now very bearish, and we've got downside targets. 35.55 is the first stop on Brent crude, then $30, and we've got lots of downside targets. There might be a little bit of a relief rally this week. We're seeing some short-term upside targets, but for the moment, whilst we're below that 38.20 level, we've got a target of 34.35 hanging over us for Brent crude. So that is there. We can't ignore it. WTI also has targets lower. $33 looks set to be the level there. And if we look at US nat gas, we're down 2% this morning. We have gone neutral on nat gas to clients this morning because this short-term trend is just quite difficult to call, and we are sort of flat there on the markets. If we look at RBOB gasoline, that will also be bearish. This just following crude, it's down 3% at the moment, so that's quite significant as well. So bearish there. Coal is down nearly 2% this morning, so that's really sunk lower, and emissions making new lows. We've just here below that level that we saw last week, and we do have some short-term downside potential on the 60-minute chart. We're seeing it's all really playing for that €20 target that's been hanging over us ever since it was given at around 26. So that's what we're watching for at the moment. UK MBP front month. The daily chart still looks pretty strong, but we are seeing on the 60-minute chart we are sinking lower, so we've gone neutral there this week. TTF is actually looking much clearer, more clearly bearish, with downside potential some 5% lower there, and we are bearish below the cloud, and that trend is much more clearly breaking. And we're seeing on seasonal gas we're actually breaking much lower as well, so that's also bad for the price with lots of downside targets here. Keep an eye on the OTC. Looking at Gazprom, we're lower here too, and if we look at German power, making new lows this morning, downside targets to 35, that's looking pretty clear. We've got 1 to 34.65 on the 1 minute chart and 36, so again keep an eye on your OTC prices there. The quarterly contact for German power is also looking lower, and even French power, we're looking here lower charts, lower targets here, some 9% lower. We've been very bearish on French power for some time. Dutch power will follow German power, of course, and if we look at Nordic power, we're seeing here this morning we're just down again on the CAL and also the quarterly contract. So making new multi-month highs, that's not good for prices. And if we look at UK power, we've got a downside target of 39.40. Watch the OTC prices here. But the main thing, of course, that will dominate the energy prices this week is what will crude oil do? Will we see some recovery? But whilst we're below this cloud with these big downside targets, it's hard to be bullish on crude oil. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.